Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the biggest financial threat to the United States isn't a market crash, a foreign war, or even inflation. It's a number so large that most people can't even picture it. $400 trillion. Not billion, trillion. This is the financial problem no one in America wants to talk about, and yet it quietly shapes your future, your taxes, your retirement, and even the value of every dollar in your pocket. Today, on Stock Predictor, we're pulling back the curtain on the $400 trillion problem facing the USA, why it's hidden in plain sight, and what it means for you. When most people think about US debt, they think about the national debt clock, currently sitting above $34 trillion. That number alone sounds terrifying, and politicians love to argue about it on TV. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The official national debt is only a small piece of the real picture. The real problem lies in something called unfunded liabilities. These are promises the US government has already made, mainly for retirement and healthcare benefits, without actually setting aside the money to pay for them. Programs like Social Security and Medicare are at the center of this crisis. For decades, Americans were promised that if they worked, paid taxes, and followed the rules, the government would take care of them in old age. And for a long time, that system worked reasonably well. But demographics have changed, and math doesn't care about political promises. Back in the 1950s and 60s, there were many workers supporting each retiree. Today, that ratio is collapsing. Fewer young workers, more retirees, and people living much longer than before. Healthcare costs are also exploding. When you add up all the future payments the government has promised for pensions, healthcare, veterans' benefits, and other obligations, and subtract the money expected to come in, you get a number that shocks even economists. Depending on the assumptions used, total unfunded liabilities can reach or even exceed $400 trillion over the long term. Now, you might be thinking, that's a future problem. Why should I worry today? Because this future problem is already shaping today's policies. Inflation, higher taxes, rising interest rates, and a weaker dollar are not random events. They are symptoms of a system under extreme pressure. Let's talk about how this problem stays hidden. Politicians rarely mention unfunded liabilities because there is no easy solution. Cutting benefits is unpopular. Raising taxes is unpopular. Printing money quietly through inflation is politically easier, because most people don't immediately connect rising prices with government debt. This is where institutions like the Federal Reserve come into the picture. The Federal Reserve doesn't officially fund government spending, but when it keeps interest rates low and buys massive amounts of government bonds, it makes borrowing cheaper and easier. Over time, this encourages more debt. When too much money chases the same goods and services, prices rise. Inflation becomes a hidden tax, reducing the real value of savings and wages while making debt easier to repay in cheaper dollars. Think about what inflation really means for you. Your paycheck might go up, but if rent, food, healthcare, and education rise faster, you're actually falling behind. Your savings lose purchasing power. Retirement becomes more uncertain. This is one of the quiet ways the $400 trillion problem leaks into everyday life. Another reason no one wants to talk about this issue is timing. Unfunded liabilities stretch decades into the future. Politicians operate on election cycles. A promise made today might not fully explode until 10, 20, or 30 years later. By then, the people who made the decisions are gone, but the bill remains. Let's imagine a simplified scenario. If the US government tried to honestly fund all its future promises, taxes would need to rise dramatically, or spending on other areas like defense, infrastructure, and education would need to be cut deeply. Neither option is politically attractive. So the system continues as it is, hoping that economic growth will somehow solve the problem. Economic growth does help, but here's the hard truth. Growth alone cannot realistically cover obligations of this magnitude. To grow out of a $400 trillion hole would require decades of unusually high growth, combined with disciplined spending and stable demographics. History suggests that this is extremely unlikely. So what happens if nothing changes? There are a few possible outcomes, none of them comfortable. One option is gradual benefit reductions. This doesn't mean checks suddenly stop. It means benefits grow more slowly than inflation, eligibility ages rise, and coverage becomes more limited. Another option is higher taxes, especially on younger workers, businesses, and investors. A third option is sustained inflation, where the real value of promised payments is quietly reduced. There is also a more extreme scenario, a loss of confidence in U.S. government finances. The dollar remains the world's reserve currency, and that gives the United States enormous power and flexibility. But reserve status is based on trust. If investors begin to believe that U.S. debt and promises are fundamentally unmanageable, borrowing costs could rise sharply. Higher interest rates would make existing debt more expensive, creating a dangerous feedback loop. Now, before panic sets in, it's important to be clear. The United States is not about to collapse tomorrow. The economy is still massive, innovative, and productive. The problem is not an immediate explosion, but a slow, grinding pressure that builds over time. Like rust on steel, it weakens the structure quietly until one day, something snaps. This brings us to the most important question. What does this mean for investors and everyday people watching Stock Predictor? First, it means financial literacy is no longer optional. Relying solely on government promises for retirement is risky. Diversification becomes critical. Assets that can protect purchasing power, such as stocks, real estate, and in some cases commodities, play an important role in long-term planning. Second, it means understanding inflation not as a temporary inconvenience, but as a structural feature of the system. When obligations are this large, policymakers have strong incentives to tolerate higher inflation. This doesn't mean hyperinflation is guaranteed, but it does mean that easy money era and rising prices are not accidents. Third, it means paying attention to policy changes. Small adjustments to retirement age, tax rules, and benefit formulas may seem minor, but over decades they can dramatically change outcomes for individuals. Staying informed gives you a chance to adapt early instead of reacting late. The $400 trillion problem also explains why debates about debt ceilings, government shutdowns, and budget deficits feel so intense yet so repetitive. These fights are surface-level symptoms. The real issue sits beneath them, largely untouched. Everyone knows it's there, but no one wants to be the first to deal with it honestly. History shows that large debt and obligation crises are usually resolved through a mix of solutions, not just one. Some benefits get reduced, some taxes rise, inflation does part of the work, and growth helps where it can. The challenge is that these adjustments often hit different generations in different ways. Younger workers may pay more. Retirees may receive less in real terms. Savers may lose purchasing power. So why is this topic rarely discussed openly? Because it forces uncomfortable conversations about trade-offs, fairness, and limits. It challenges the idea that every promise can be kept forever without consequences. And in a political environment driven by short-term wins, long-term honesty is rare. As we wrap up, remember this: the $400 trillion problem is not just a government issue. It's a personal finance issue. It affects how you save, how you invest, and how you plan your future. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. Understanding it gives you power. If you want more deep, honest analysis about the forces shaping markets, money, and your financial future, make sure you stay tuned to Stock Predictor. Because the problems no one wants to talk about are often the ones that matter the most.